What should he have done? There were a bunch of moves I think he could have played.
And HIkaru seems on tilt. He's blitzing out the opening.
Queen d8. Yeah, he is. But he goes knight g6, getting that square away from the king. Knight h5 check, king h6, knight takes f6. And that pawn was absolutely crucial because it was protecting the g5 square. And after knight h5, no matter where the king goes, for example, nope, that's not the move. The move is rook c8, and that is simply checkmate. What a crazy turnaround.
Yeah, just as HIkaru seemed out of the woods, he made a terrible blunder. Yeah, very unfortunate because, yeah, it seemed like he had just done a good job equalizing, but yeah, Wesley brings it back to 1 game.
Indeed, and this is a pivotal game with 10 minutes and a half remaining on the match clock. This could be the last game, or there might be one more after this. Let's see how Wesley handles yet another canal attack of the Sicilian.
Yeah, so HIkaru trades on b4. I mean, I'd assume that, okay, this trade should favor HIkaru because opponent b4 is slightly vulnerable, and you've given up the pressure on opponent d4. So HIkaru having some more freedom in the center now.
Yeah, and again, he can decide where to put this bishop, bishop f4. Bishop g5 inducing h6 is an idea he's essayed in the last white game. But also bishop d2, as you mentioned, would hit the b5. Oh, he goes for the other option, bishop e3.
Right. Okay, but now the pawn on e4 is always a little bit loose, right? The bishop and the knight, they can never move. I'd assume queen e2 here. Stopping bishop a. Maybe Wesley wants to go for bishop a6 again. So queen e2 would be a nice move to stop that.
Yes, I agree. I mean, h3 is another typical prophylactic, just semi-waiting move. But I agree, bishop a6 probably needs to be addressed.
And queen e2 is on the board. Yeah, and now the position looks a little bit tough for Wesley because what exactly do you do here?
Well, can you play d5 and maybe change the nature of the position? d5, e5, knight e4. Sometimes when things are uncomfortable, that's kind of what you want to do. Although that might end up being exacerbating the situation even further after like bishop f4 in that position.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's an interesting idea because indeed, black has no easy moves here. He goes knight g4. That's a clear sign that Wesley doesn't know what to do, but I also don't really see a clear plan for black here. Queen b6.
Yeah, he's kind of shuffling. h3.
I guess his idea is that he wants to get in bishop a6. Right, so even if, let's say, HIkaru goes h3 and bishop e3, bishop a6 now. And trade of the bishops.
HIkaru really played that fast, Benjamin. I would have put some thought into maybe trying to prevent bishop a6 because you might look at this and say, well, why is this in black's favor? It's because this bishop on d3 just anchors white's position. It defends the pawn. And if white plays e5, which HIkaru has done in the past, it immediately aims at the king. This is an important piece. I really like what Wesley just did there.
Exactly. And now also, if HIkaru ever goes queen c6, he does try to go queen to c2, whereas the bishop on d3, like you said, it defends upon an e4, but also defends the c2 square.
Yeah.
So it covers all of the entry squares on the c file.
It seems like HIkaru is just a tiny bit, I don't want to say tilted, but frustrated, and I think it's showing. Now d5 is a viable possibility. Queen c6, your move, aiming for c2. Queen b5 is another way to put some pressure on the queen side. I think Wesley has gotten out of the woods completely here.
Yeah, no, I mean, it seems like he's taking over the initiative. I feel like HIkaru was playing a little bit too fast, perhaps, not really trying to be precise. And it's looking tough for him now. I mean, Wesley controls the only open file on the board. His center is more of a liability, I would say. I mean, the pawn on e4 needs constant attention. So, yeah, I feel like he played a little bit too fast.
Why does it need constant attention? Because somebody traded the light squared bishops.
Yeah.
Now HIkaru is settling into a think. I mean, honestly, I would even consider playing rook d2 and accepting a slightly worse endgame, just trying to make a draw there, but just don't see any good prospects here for it. You could also play rook c3, kind of a cheeky move, but then you give up the c file.
HIkaru going queen to d1. He wants to keep pieces on the board, which is understandable.
Still d5 looks pretty tempting. I mean, at least to me.
Indeed, and knight e4. Yeah, that looks very nice.
Just a good way to keep tightening the screws, and Wesley plays it.
Knight e4, bishop f4 by HIkaru, blitzed out. Okay, so he's attacking the knight on c4, adding another attacker. I guess if Wesley trades on g3, maybe he wants to stick with the pawn to try to start some sort of counterplay along the f file. but it's,
Yeah, I agree with taking the pawn. I think HIkaru is so good at just sort of very subtly creating, setting up the atmosphere for counterplay, and then he strikes when you least expect it.
right.
There it
And
is.
indeed, he does take with the pawn. A4, I guess rook f1, just putting the rook on the f file.
Right, and kind of asking Wesley what he wants to do exactly on the queen side, because you can't play b3 yet. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
Oh no, I was just about to say the same thing. Yeah, like b3 just hangs the pawn, and if a3, I guess HIkaru just keeps it close with the move b3.
Although, as HIkaru goes bishop g5, after a3 b3, you do have that c3 square, which you can use as a base of operations for black stroke. Wesley says no trade.
Right. Yeah.
Leaving the bishop on g5 kind of in the dust.
Yeah. Yeah, the bishop is a little bit in the way. Maybe HIkaru should go bishop e3 and then knight g5. That could be a nice plan.
Yep, and queen c4.
Wesley going queen c4. So
inviting b3.
But then queen c2. So knight e1 by HIkaru, giving up a pawn, but
Great
he wants to go queen h. Wait, the pawn f7 cannot be protected. Like queen h5, if g6, queen f3. Then he gets a huge attack.
Boom, boom, boom. How are you defending that pawn? That queen on a2 is nowhere to be found. And this is exactly what we talked about. HIkaru, the moment he played f takes g3, I could just sense that he's going to orchestrate something on the f file. And Wesley has to find rook a7 here, rook c7, creating, which is a very findable move, rook a7. And if rook f3, you can play knight b8, swinging the knight to c6, and most importantly, protecting the f7 pawn. This is a critical moment for Wesley to correctly react and not panic.
Indeed, yeah. And he goes rook to c7, defending the pawn on f7 dead way.
Good move.
The position, okay, knight b8 now, defending the pawn and planning knight to c6.
And you don't want to go knight b6 because the knight's just not going to have any prospects on b6. Right. White could play b3 and the knight's just going to be totally stuck in the dust. Look at Wesley on knight top b8, of the situation.
Move. b3, an insta trade on the b3 square, and queen a6. It's still looking unpleasant for HIkaru. I mean, knight c6 is coming, queen a1 potentially, the trade of the queens, because the endgame is always going to be very, very unpleasant for white.
Yeah, I mean, HIkaru's only target is f7, and if Wesley successfully defends it, as he has, you know, black still has tremendous queenside pressure. Now, rook a7 might have been a little bit slow.
Yeah, that seems a little too cautious. Maybe rook f2. Aha, he wants to go knight f3 or queen h5. Maybe queen h5, knight f3, knight g5. That's his idea. Rook c3, but bishop d2.
Now you can take the pawn on g3 here, but that rook could end up getting in trouble.
H2. Your rook is trapped.
Rook g6.
Oh wait, you just go back that way. I just completely.
Yeah, but the eval bar. h4 is the move. H4, h5, and the rook actually is trapped.
Knight f3.
Knight f3. He's going with a knight h4. Obviously, this Wesley has allowed tremendous counterplay. Now he has to go bishop e7, and guess what? That cuts off the contact between the rook on a7 and the pawn on f7. Things all of a sudden looking so unpleasant for black.
Yeah,
the best move is h4.
Very tricky.
He can still play h4, but then black has the g4 square.
Right, yeah. So h4 sort of loses its punch. What should HIkaru do here? He's down a pawn, but the rook on g6 looks so off. He goes g4.
Makes perfect sense. Just trying to keep restricting the rook. And of course, he's not worried about the safety of his own king. Look at how many pieces white has here.
Rook's knight c6 and bishop e3, further solidifying the pawn on d4. I guess he wants to go g5. Okay, so h6 by Wesley.
Preventing
nice it. Move, preventing it indeed. Rook g1, HIkaru wants to push. Okay, bishop g5.
G5. Wesley trying to orchestrate a blockade on those dark squares to stop HIkaru from advancing his kingside
bishop
pawns.
And then h4. Pawn takes g5.
Oh, arresting the rook on g6.
Yeah. Let's see what HIkaru.
I love that idea. HIkaru with 45 seconds. Queen d2. Queen d2.
Okay, attacking the pawn, so to speak, on g5.
This is a huge, huge game. There's a minute and a half remaining on the match clock. This might very well be the last game.
Yeah. This game is indeed critical. It determines whether HIkaru will take a 2-point lead going into the 3-minute portion or whether it's going to be equal. I think if HIkaru wins this game, I don't see Wesley coming back. So queen b6 by Wesley, eyeing the pawn on d4.
Now, still your idea is very, very interesting. Bishop takes g5 and then h4. Now HIkaru repositioning the rook, trying to play on both sides of the board. That's a nasty move as well. This position is right up HIkaru's wheelhouse. This is what he does best. These tense positions in time pressure where he's got the initiative, he is generally unstoppable. And I'm so worried, Benjamin, about this rook on g6. Wesley's basically playing without a rook.
Exactly. It makes it so tough to play in the time pressure. And he goes rook to c7. That looks off because the rook on c7, I mean, he cannot take on d4 because he's pinned. And HIkaru takes and goes queen to c2.
There we go. Pin.
Getting a nest.
And maybe rook c8. Yep.
But your rook on g6, if you trade, you're just trading down into an endgame down a rook practically.
Yeah, and White's just going to bring the other rook to c2. Wesley has to drop his queen back, but then HIkaru could triple anyway. No, this is...
97? Okay, he trades on 97, but trade and rook a2.
Ooh.
Wait, how do you check
rook a8 and rook a7?
You just lose f7. Your rook on g6 is completely stuck. This is HIkaru as a huge initiative.
Wait a second.
Knight a5.
Oh, knight a5 hitting the pawn on b3. There's counterplay, but HIkaru wins the pawn. And knight e2, knight f4. It's not over yet. Wesley has somehow gotten his knight to an active square. Can he extricate his rook?
But still, his rook is passive. Rook b6. You cannot go rook a6 because then you hang the pawn on g5.
Right.
Well, he does it anyway.
But then king g6 and h3 is going to be hanging. Is Wesley getting out of this? Is Wesley getting out of this?
But then how do you defend the pawn on h3? Like you cannot take it. Maybe h4 takes.
h4.
Rook f8.
Oh, if knight
where do you go with the knight?
Mate on g5.
But then, but now knight g5, knight e6. Knight e6. You take an e6.
Defending
king h7. The check
g5,
and
e6.
now the e pawn. The e pawn. King h7, e6, e6. You cannot stop the pawn.
It's over. E78 queen. What an incredible finale there.
This game.
What